All the horror of the times was depicted by Martiniere in the vividest of colours, when, the next morning, she related to her mistress what had happened the previous night, and, with much quaking, handed over to her the mysterious casket. Both she and Baptiste, who, standing in a corner as white as a sheet and twisting his nightcap in his hands with anxiety, could scarcely utter a word, begged Mademoiselle in the most pathetic way for heaven's sake to open the box only with the utmost caution. Mademoiselle Scudery, weighing the locked secret in her hand and examining it, said with a smile, "You look like a couple of ghosts. That I am not rich, that I have no treasures worth murdering for, is as well known to those evil assassins who, as you yourself said, spy into the innermost corners, as it is to you and me. Can they be after my life? Who can be interested in the death of a person of 73 who has pursued scoundrels and disturbers of the peace only in novels she herself has written? Who writes mediocre verses incapable of arousing envy? Who will leave nothing behind but the wardrobe of an old maid who occasionally went to court and a couple of dozen books with gilded edges? And you, Martiniere, you can make the stranger sound as terrifying as you like, yet I cannot believe he has any evil intent in mind." Martiniere started back 3 paces. Baptiste sank almost to his knees with a dull as their mistress pressed a protruding knob, and the lid of the box sprang noisily open. How astonished Mademoiselle was, as in the box there sparkled up at her a pair of golden bracelets, richly set with jewels, and an identical necklace. She took out the jewellery, and as she praised the beautiful workmanship of the necklace, Martiniere stared at the expensive bracelets and cried over and over again that even the conceited Montespan did not possess such finery. "But what is it supposed to be? What does it mean?" said Mademoiselle Scudery. At that moment she saw a folded note in the bottom of the box, but hardly had she read what it contained than the note fell from her trembling hand. She threw a glance up to heaven and sank back into the armchair. Terrified, Martiniere and Baptiste ran to her side. "Oh!" she cried, in a voice half choked with tears. "Oh, the insult! Oh, the deep humiliation! Must this happen to me at my age? Have I behaved in a silly, frivolous way like a young, witless thing? Oh, God! Must words uttered half in jest bear such dreadful significance? I, who have been true to virtue and piety, irreproachable since childhood, must I then face such an accusation?" Mademoiselle held her handkerchief to her eyes and sobbed violently, so that Martiniere and Baptiste, utterly bewildered, did not know how to help their dear mistress in her distress. Martiniere picked up the note from the floor and read what was written. "Un amant qui craint le voleur n'est pas digne d'amour. Your penetrating wit, most esteemed lady, has saved us from great persecution. Us, who exercise the right of the strong on the weak and cowardly, and appropriate to ourselves riches which would otherwise have been shamefully squandered. As proof of our gratitude, kindly accept these jewels. They are the most expensive we have procured for some time, although you, dear lady, should be adorned with much finer jewellery than this. We beg you not to withdraw from us your friendship and your gracious remembrance. We who are invisible." "Is it possible?" cried Mademoiselle Scudery, when she had recovered to some extent. "Is it possible that impudence and wicked mockery can be carried so far?" The sun was shining brightly through the window blinds of bright red silk, and made the diamonds which lay on the table by the open box sparkle with a reddish gleam. Looking at them, Mademoiselle Scudery hid her face in horror, and ordered Martiniere to take away the frightful jewels, to which the blood of the murdered victim seemed still to cling. Martiniere, shutting the necklace and bracelets back in the box, thought that the best thing to do would be to hand them to the Minister of Police, and to confide in him everything that had happened, including the alarming appearance of the young man and the handing over of the box. Mademoiselle Scudery stood and slowly paced the room in silence, as if considering what should now be done. Then she told Baptiste to fetch a sedan chair, and Martiniere to dress her. She wanted to go instantly to see the Marquise de Maintenon. She had herself conveyed to the Marquise at a time when the latter, as Mademoiselle Scudery well knew, was alone in her apartments. She took the box of jewellery with her. The Marquise wondered greatly when she saw Mademoiselle, usually the epitome of dignity, charm, and grace, now enter pale, with face distorted and with faltering steps. "What in heaven's name has happened to you?" she cried to the poor woman, who, quite beside herself, and scarcely capable of standing, made for the armchair which the Marquise pushed towards her. At last, again able to speak, Mademoiselle explained what intolerable indignity that thoughtless jest with which she had responded to the plea from the imperilled lovers had caused her. The Marquise, after she had heard all in detail, thought that Mademoiselle Scudery was taking the extraordinary event much too much to heart, that insults of the rabble could never strike a noble spirit, and finally she asked to look at the jewels. Mademoiselle Scudery gave her the opened box, and the Marquise could not suppress a cry of amazement when she beheld the gems. She took out the necklace and the bracelets and walked over to the window with them, where she let the sunlight play on them and held the fine goldwork up to her eyes to see clearly the marvellous craft in each small link of the entwined chains. Suddenly the Marquise turned to Mademoiselle and cried, "Do you realize, Mademoiselle, that these bracelets, this necklace, can have been made by no one but René Cardillac?" René Cardillac was the most skilful goldsmith in Paris, and one of the most artistically gifted and at the same time strangest men of his age. Small in stature but broad-shouldered and strongly built, though well advanced into his 50s, Cardillac still had the strength and agility of a young man. He possessed a head of thick curly red hair, and a strange glance came from his deep-set, green, flashing eyes. His familiarity with the nature of precious stones was such that jewels rated as insignificant came out of his workshop in glittering splendour. He took on every order with a burning zeal, and fixed the price so low it appeared to bear no relationship to the work he did. Then he laboured without rest. He could be heard hammering in his workshop day and night, and often the work would be almost complete when the design would suddenly displease him, or he would have doubts about the elegance of the setting, and that would be sufficient for the whole job to be thrown back into the melting pot and started again from scratch. Each item was thus an unsurpassable masterpiece. Now, however, it was scarcely possible to obtain any finished work from him. On 1,000 pretexts he put his customers off from week to week, from month to month. In vain he was offered double for the work. He would take not a penny more than the agreed price. At length he had to yield to the customer's insistence and produce the jewellery. Yet as he did so he could not suppress signs of deep vexation, even of rage. If he had to supply a particularly expensive work, worth perhaps many thousands, he was capable of running around as if out of his mind, cursing himself and his work. But as soon as anyone came to him crying, "René Cardillac, won't you make a necklace for my bride, bracelets for my girlfriend?" he would suddenly stand still, dart a fiery glance at him and ask, rubbing his hands together, "What have you got then?" The other would pull out a little case and say, "Here are some gems. They're nothing special, the usual thing, but in your hands." Cardillac would not let him finish, but would snatch the little case from him, take out the gems, which really would not be worth much, hold them up to the light, and cry, full of delight, "Ho, ho! The usual stuff, eh? Not at all. Pretty stones, magnificent stones. Just let me make them up. And if a few more louis mean nothing to you, I will include a couple of little stones which will sparkle to your eyes like the dear sun itself." "I leave everything to you, Master René," the other would say, "and I will pay whatever you ask." Cardillac would then throw himself impetuously at him, hug and kiss him, and say he was perfectly happy again, and the work would be ready in a week. He would run headlong home and into his workshop, and hammer away, and in a week a masterpiece would be completed. But when he who had ordered it came to pay the small fee required and wanted to take the finished jewellery away with him, Cardillac would become rude and pig-headed. "But, Master Cardillac, just think, my wedding day is tomorrow." "Oh, what does your wedding matter to me? Inquire again in a fortnight." "The jewellery is ready, here is the money, I must have it." "And I tell you I still have a lot of alterations to do, and I will not release it today." "And I tell you that if you do not release the jewellery, for which I am willing to pay you double, you shall see me return straight away with a couple of Arkansas's men." Now may Satan torment you with 100 hot pincers and hang 300 weights on the necklace so that your bride may choke." And with that, Cardillac would stuff the jewellery into the bridegroom's breast pocket, grip him by the arm, and throw him out of the room and down the stairs, and would then stand at the window laughing at the poor young fellow, limping out of the house, holding a handkerchief to his bleeding nose. It was a mystery why, when he had taken on work with enthusiasm, Cardillac would often suddenly beseech the customer, with every indication of deep agitation, with the most affecting protestations, even with sobs and tears and swearing by the Virgin and all the saints, to release it from him. He had refused Madame de Maintenon's every order too. With expressions of horror and disgust he had refused her proposal that he should produce a small ring, embellished with emblems of art, which she intended to give to Racine. "I'll wager," said Madame de Maintenon, "that if I send out to Cardillac to learn for whom he made this jewellery, he would refuse to come here because he would fear another order, and he absolutely will not do anything for me, although he does seem to be desisting from his inflexible obstinacy, for I hear he is now working more industriously than ever, and is delivering his work on time, though still with ill humour and an averted face." Mademoiselle Scudery, who also set great store on returning the jewellery to its rightful owner if that were still possible, thought they might tell the strange master that it was not his work, but only his opinion that was required. This the Marquis agreed to. A message was sent to Cardillac, and, as if he had already been on his way, in a short time he entered the room. When he saw Mademoiselle Scudery, he seemed embarrassed and confused. He bowed low to the worthy lady, and then turned to the Marquis, who asked him abruptly whether the jewellery which sparkled on the dark green table was his work. Cardillac hardly glanced at it, but, his eyes fixed on the face of the Marquis, he quickly packed the bracelets and necklace back into the casket and pushed it violently away from him. Then, with an unpleasant smile, he said, "Indeed, Madame Marquis, one must have a very poor knowledge of René Cardillac's work to believe even for a moment that any other goldsmith in the world could set such jewellery. Certainly it is my work." "Tell me then," the Marquis continued, "for whom you made this jewellery?" "For myself," Cardillac replied. Madame Maintenon and Mademoiselle Scudery looked at him in amazement. "Yes, you might find that rather strange, Madame Marquis," he went on, "but it is a fact. Desiring some beautiful work, I collected all my finest stones together and worked more diligently and carefully than ever before, purely for the joy of it. The jewellery inexplicably disappeared from my workshop some time ago." "Heaven be praised!" cried Mademoiselle Scudery, her eyes shining with joy. She jumped up from the armchair like a young girl, stepped across to Cardillac, and laid her hands on his shoulders. "Take it," she said. "Master René, take back the property which those villains stole from you." Now she was told how she came to possess the jewellery. Cardillac listened to everything in silence and with downcast eyes. Only now and then did he emit an inaudible, so, fancy, now placing his hands behind his back, now stroking his chin. As Mademoiselle Scudery concluded, it was as if Cardillac were battling with his thoughts, as if some decision were refusing to be made. He rubbed his brows. He sighed. He passed his hand over his eyes as if to control impending tears. Finally, he grasped the little box which Mademoiselle Scudery offered him, dropped slowly onto one knee, and said, "Fate has intended this jewellery for you, noble, worthy lady. Yes, I now realize for the first time that it was you I was thinking of while I worked. Yes, I was working for you. Do not disdain to take this from me and to wear it. This jewellery is indeed the finest I have made for a long time." Now, cried Mademoiselle Scudery, "what are you thinking of, Master René? Does it become me at my age to dress myself in jewels? And how comes it that you wish to make me such a magnificent gift? If I were as beautiful as the Marquis de Fontanges, and as rich, I would not let the jewellery out of my hands. But what will such splendour do for these wrinkled arms? And what will this sparkling finery do for this scrawny neck?" Cardillac had risen, and, as if beside himself, with a wild look he extended the box to Mademoiselle Scudery and said, "Have compassion on me, mademoiselle, and take the jewels. You cannot believe what a profound admiration I have for your virtue, for your great merits. Accept my small gift, if only to let me prove it to you." As Mademoiselle Scudery continued to hesitate, Madame Maintenon took the little casket from Cardillac's hands and said, "Now, by heaven, mademoiselle, you are always talking of your great age. What have we to do with years, you and I, or with their burden? Do not behave like a young bashful thing who would like to take the fruit if it could only be done without touching it. Do not reject honest Master René. Take as a gift what others cannot obtain for all the gold they have, for requests and supplications beyond number." Madame Maintenon had meanwhile forced the box on Mademoiselle Scudery. Now Cardillac dropped to his knees, kissed the hem of Mademoiselle Scudery's skirt, kissed her hands, moaned, sighed, wept, sobbed, and ran out, upsetting the armchair and table, so that the porcelain and glasses rattled together. "By all the saints, what has happened to the man?" Mademoiselle Scudery cried. The Marquise emitted a shrill laugh and cried, "There we have it, mademoiselle. Master René is desperately in love with you, and, in accordance with practice and custom, is with true gallantry beginning to storm your heart with rich gifts." She amplified the jest, admonished Mademoiselle Scudery not to be too cruel towards the desperate lover, and avowed that, if this was how matters stood, the world would soon behold the unexampled spectacle of a 73-years-old lady of irreproachable aristocracy becoming the bride of a goldsmith. She volunteered to plait the bridal garland and to instruct Mademoiselle Scudery on the duties of a good housewife, for a young slip of a thing such as she was could certainly not know much about such matters. When at last Mademoiselle Scudery rose to take leave of the Marquise, notwithstanding the jesting, she became very serious again, since the jewel box was once more in her hands. She said, "To be sure, Marquise, I shall never be able to wear this jewellery. It has been in the hands of those fiends, who, with the cheek of the devil, and indeed, even in association with him, commit robbery and murder. I shudder at the blood which seems to cling to these gems, and now even Cardillac's behaviour has, I must confess, for me something peculiarly unnerving and uncanny about it. I cannot resist the dark foreboding that behind all this there is some dreadful, terrible secret hidden. I cannot imagine how honest Master René, the model of a good, pious citizen, should have anything to do with such damnable evil. But this much is certain. I shall never dare to wear these jewels." The Marquise felt that this was taking scruples too far. However, when Mademoiselle Scudery asked her, on her conscience, what she would do in her place, she answered seriously and firmly, "Sooner throw the jewels into the Seine than ever wear them." Mademoiselle Scudery penned some verses about her meeting with Master René, which she read the following evening to the king in Mademoiselle Maintenon's apartments. The king laughed his sides sore, and swore that Boileau d'Esparros had met his match, Mademoiselle Scudery's poem being one of the wittiest ever written. Several months later, Mademoiselle Scudery was driving across the Pont Neuf in the glass coach belonging to the Duchess of Montpensier. The invention was still so new that the gaping crowd encircling the coach almost blocked the horse's path. Mademoiselle Scudery suddenly became aware of a swearing and cursing, and observed someone fighting and elbowing his way through the thickest part of the crowd. As he came nearer, she met the penetrating gaze of a deathly pale, grief-distorted youthful countenance. The young man stared at her as he made his way through, until he came within reach of the door of the carriage, which he tore open, threw a note into Mademoiselle Scudery's lap, and, dealing and receiving cuffs and blows, disappeared as he had come. Martinière, who was sitting next to Mademoiselle Scudery, collapsed in a faint against the cushions. In vain did Mademoiselle Scudery pull at the cord and call for the coachman. As if driven by an evil spirit, he whipped at the horses, which, foaming at the mouth, veered round, veered up, and thundered on across the bridge. Mademoiselle poured her smelling salts over the unconscious woman, who at length opened her eyes, and, shaking and stammering, and clutching hold of her mistress, stammered with difficulty, "In the name of the Holy Virgin, what did that dreadful man want? It was him! It was him! The same who brought you the little casket that awful night!" Mademoiselle Scudery calmed the poor woman, and told her that nothing had happened, and that it was only necessary to find out what the note contained. She unfolded the piece of paper and read, "An evil fate which you can avert has hurled me into an abyss. I beseech you, take the necklace and bracelets which you received from me to René Cardillac under any pretext whatever, so as to have something improved or altered perhaps. Your well-being, your life, depend on it. If you do not do this by the day after tomorrow, I shall force my way into your apartment and kill myself before your eyes." "Now it is certain," said Mademoiselle Scudery when she had read this, "that though this mysterious man may belong to the band of villainous thieves and murderers, he harbours no evil designs against me. If he had succeeded in speaking to me that night, perhaps he would have given me the key to these mysteries which I now seek for in my soul in vain. But let happen what will, what is asked of me I will do, if only to be rid of this unlucky jewellery. Cardillac will not so easily let it out of his hands again." Mademoiselle Scudery intended to make her way to the goldsmith's with the jewellery the next day, yet it was as if all the fine minds of Paris had agreed to besiege her that morning with poems, plays, and anecdotes. Hardly had La Chapelle finished the scene of a tragedy and slyly assured her that he now believed he would conquer Racine, than the latter himself appeared and outdid him with a speech by some king or other. Noon was past. Mademoiselle Scudery had to visit the Duchess of Montpensier, and Master René Cardillac had therefore to be postponed until the next day. Mademoiselle Scudery felt tormented by a strange restlessness. The young man appeared constantly before her eyes, and an obscure memory seemed to want to rise from her innermost depths, as if she had seen that countenance, those features before. Anxious dreams troubled the lightest slumber. It seemed to her that she had thoughtlessly failed to grasp the hand which the unfortunate fellow, sinking into the abyss, had stretched out to her, that she had failed to avert some ruinous event, some terrible crime. As soon as it was morning, she dressed and drove to the goldsmith's, bearing the jewel-box. People were streaming towards the Rue Nicaise, where Cardillac lived, gathering around the door, shouting, making an uproar, trying to storm inside, and being with difficulty prevented by men-at-arms who surrounded the house. In a wild, confused uproar, angry voices shouted, "Lynch him! Tear the murderer to pieces!" At length, Desgrais appeared with a party of men, who forced a way through the thickest part of the crowd. The main door burst open. A man weighed down with chains was brought out and dragged away under the curses of the furious mob. On the instant Mademoiselle Scudery, half fainting with terror and apprehension, became aware of all this, a wail of misery reached her ears. "On! Keep going!" she cried to the coachman, who had with a rapid turn parted the crowd and stopped directly in front of Cardillac's door. There she saw Desgrais, and at his feet a young girl, as lovely as the day, with her hair loose, half undressed, wild anxiety and hopeless despair in her face, who gripped him about the knees and cried in a tone of mortal agony, "But he is innocent! He is innocent!" Desgrais' efforts and those of his men to pull her away and stand her on her feet were in vain. A strong, rough youth finally laid hold on the poor girl and tore her away from Desgrais by force. Then he stumbled and let go of the girl, who fell down the steps and lay, motionless as if dead, in the roadway. Mademoiselle Scudery could restrain herself no longer. "In Christ's name, what has happened? What is going on here?" she cried, and opened the door and climbed down. The people gave way to her, and she approached Desgrais and repeated her question. "A terrible thing has happened," said Desgrais. "René Cardillac was found murdered this morning by a dagger. His apprentice, Olivier Brusson, is the murderer. He has just been led away to prison." "And the girl?" cried Mademoiselle Scudery. "She," said Desgrais, "is Madelon, Cardillac's daughter. The wicked man was her lover. Now she is crying that Brusson is innocent, quite innocent. But she knows about the deed, and I must take her to the conciergerie too." As he spoke, Desgrais threw a malicious glance at the girl, at which Mademoiselle Scudery trembled. The girl was beginning to breathe, but she still lay incapable of sound or movement, with her eyes closed. Deeply moved, Mademoiselle Scudery gazed at the angelic child and shuddered at the thought of Desgrais and his men. There was a muffled rumbling down the steps. They were bringing Cardelac's body. With a sudden resolve, Mademoiselle Scudery cried, "I am taking the girl with me. You can look after the rest, Desgrais." A murmur of approval ran through the crowd. The women lifted the girl. Everyone pressed round. 100 pairs of hands laboured to assist them, and, as if floating on air, the girl was borne into the carriage. Dr. Serran, one of the most famous physicians in Paris, finally succeeded in reviving Madelon. Mademoiselle Scudery completed what the doctor had begun, until at last a flood of tears gave vent to Madelon's feelings. The overpowering pain of her words now and then choking her with great sobs, she tried to relate how everything had happened. At about midnight she was awoken by a gentle knocking on her bedroom door, and she recognized Olivier's voice imploring her to get up immediately. Her father was dying, he said. She sprang up and opened the door. Olivier, pale, in disarray and pouring with sweat, went with the light in his hand, reeling towards the workshop. She followed him. There lay her father in the throes of death. She threw herself upon him, and only then did she notice his blood-stained shirt. Olivier had gently drawn her away and endeavoured to wash and bandage the wound in her father's left side. During this time her father's senses returned. He regarded her and then Olivier with a tender look, took hold of her hand, laid it in Olivier's, and pressed them both firmly. Olivier and she had gone on their knees by her father's bed. With a piercing cry he raised himself up, but at once sank back again, and with a deep sigh passed away. Olivier had related how the master, on an errand which he had had to make with him that night, had been murdered in his presence, and how, with the greatest effort, he had carried the heavy man, whom he had not thought mortally wounded, back home. As soon as morning came, the occupants of the house, whose attention had been attracted by the banging, wailing, and lamenting in the night, came up and found them, still quite inconsolable, on their knees beside her father's body. Now there was uproar. The constables burst in and hauled Olivier off to prison as his master's murderer. Madelon gave the most touching description of the virtue, piety, and loyalty of her beloved Olivier, how he had held his master in high esteem as if he had been his own father, how the latter had returned his love in full, how, in spite of Olivier's poverty, he had chosen him as his son-in-law because his skill equalled his loyalty and noble spirit. All this Madelon related from the depths of her heart, and ended by saying that even if Olivier had stabbed her father in her own presence, she would sooner regard it as a trick of Satan than believe him capable of so dreadful and gruesome a crime. Mademoiselle Scudery, deeply touched by Madelon's sufferings and inclined to regard the poor Olivier as innocent, made inquiries and confirmed everything Madelon had said as to the relations between master and apprentice. The other occupants of the house, the neighbours, all concurred in praising Olivier as a model of piety, loyalty, and diligence. No one knew anything ill of him, and when the dreadful deed was mentioned, each shrugged his shoulders and said there was something incomprehensible about it. Brought before the Chambre Ardente, so Mademoiselle Scudery learned, Olivier steadfastly denied his guilt, and asserted that his master had been attacked in the street in his presence, and that he had dragged him back home still alive. This, too, accorded with Madelon's tale. Mademoiselle Scudery had the details of the dreadful event repeated to her again and again. She inquired whether there had ever been any dispute between master and apprentice, whether perhaps Olivier was not entirely free of that violent temper which often overcomes even the most good-natured people and can lead to irrational deeds. The more Madelon spoke of the domestic happiness in which the three of them had lived, the more completely every shadow of suspicion against Olivier vanished away. Even discounting everything which spoke for his innocence, Mademoiselle Scudery could find not a single motive for the deed. "He is poor, but gifted. He gained the affection of one of the most famous of master craftsmen and fell in love with his daughter. The master looked kindly on his love. Happiness and prosperity opened to him. Convinced of Olivier's innocence, Mademoiselle Scudery resolved to save the innocent youth, whatever the cost.